It's called We Got This. You're very optimistic at the start of 2021. Why?
Because COVID numbers are low, vaccines are coming, the Reserve Bank's added some extra juice, state governments are spending a fortune on infrastructure. Job results so far, out of all the jobs we lost when this hit, we've got 6 out of every 7 back already. And things like iron ore prices riding very, very high. That combination leaves Australia pretty well positioned.
Stepping through a few of your assumptions, you talk about borders mostly being open. Perhaps they will be, perhaps not. And the other thing is, I think people have lost all confidence in them being open and being able to plan for borders being open. You don't go to Adelaide, you don't go to Queensland because you're worried about what the premiers will make and these retrospective decisions. Isn't that going to hang over not just what people do in tourism, but business as well?
Absolutely. So 2 things, though. One is, the plan is that by the end of March, we'll have 4 million people vaccinated, the most vulnerable because of their health, but also the most vulnerable because of where they work. So airlines, quarantine hotel staff, and the like. That combination says we'll be shifting into a phase where we're less likely to get outbreaks, which would mean borders are less likely to slam shut. And so we are only a couple of months away from where those dangers are headed down. The other thing is, even if you have those continuing rumblings, don't forget we are recovering anyway from the depths of the downturns and the shutdowns, the lockdowns that we had.
Yeah, and so that means we might improve. I suppose it's how far off a COVID normal or pre-COVID economy we are. The other aspect then, so you mentioned the vaccine. We know there are questions being raised around the current Pfizer vaccine. Look, it's early on, I'm not trying to say it won't be a good outcome overall. AstraZeneca, though, and the efficacy of it, is the concern that there'll still be a big cohort of older Australians, perhaps not confident about the vaccine they've taken, perhaps not taking the vaccine, and then you've got a big cohort not travelling, not spending money, and you might still have this big drag on the economy. The vaccine, essentially, might not be as promising as it seems.
And I wouldn't claim to be a health expert, but if you think through the economics of that, you're right, there is a continuing drag there. However, it's the case that vaccines have turned up earlier and better than many had assumed. You note that Pfizer or AstraZeneca, as you're thinking Australian rollout, you do have something of a horses for courses. It seems that one is more efficacious, if I can be forgiven the word. The other is very, very safe. Between the two of them, it's not a bad combination, and you will start to see similar effects around the world. They're starting from further behind the curve with really high COVID case numbers than we are.
I suppose it's if they can be taken in conjunction, but I will join you as not being a medical expert on that. So one of those things we'll only be able to see in the rollout. I want to talk broadly. I'm just seeing an increasing number of bears, people that don't believe the economy, but in particular the stock market's in a great state for the future. They think the market's set for a big crash. Valuations are very high in terms of historical figures. And the only thing holding up the markets for a lot of people, and the economy more broadly, such low interest rates, meaning people have more money to spend now and the money has to go somewhere. But are these the ingredients for a crash later on? Particularly, so much focus on COVID right now, it's short term. That threat sort of fades away and people go, gee, this market's a bit higher than I thought. I might just quietly pull my money out here. Is that a real risk?
There is a risk there. Having said that, markets and economies are 2 different things. The strength in markets at the moment isn't providing that much support to economies. If that wound back, it wouldn't hurt economies as much as people think. There is a degree of disconnect. You're also right, though, about markets. They tend to look through the short-term stuff, and right now that's mostly COVID, and focus on longer-term stuff, and right now that's mostly the change in interest rates. And Australia is a good example. Much of the world has had relatively low interest rates for the better part of a decade. COVID brought really low interest rates here to Australia and brought them for some years to come. And that is a genuine game changer. It is why house prices rose 3% last year instead of continuing to fall. It's why share markets are as strong as they are.
Yeah, talk about that disconnect. I mean, it takes me to what Donald Trump always focused on during his presidency, He's still president now, of course, but, you know, look at the stock market. The Dow's got another record at the same time as the economy was not travelling all that well. So there's, yes, a disconnect, but if we see a huge crash in the market, it affects a lot of things. People look at their super balances, they don't feel as wealthy, they get more cautious. I mean, there'd still be a big impact on our economy.
There'd be an impact on our economy. And there is a chance that some share markets around the world are more overvalued than others.
So where do you feel Australia sits in that level then?
And this is not investment advice, Tom.
No, well, we'll get a disclaimer up.
My personal view is that the Australian market is more fairly priced than most other markets around the world. Again, you look at where Australia is right now. We are one of the very few nations that has dealt with COVID as well as we have to this point. Our economy, relative to other nations around the world, you know, we'd be one of 5 nations entering 2021 around the world with a relatively strong economy. By and large, we got this.
Is there a sense that when you talk about that comparison once again, if Australia's recovery is more sustainable again, ultimately money will go somewhere that if there is a downturn but Australia's still seen as better than the rest, that's the place to be right now? Not necessarily a brilliantly humming economy, but better than most of the rest?
And we are, you know, again, because we're Australia. We see Australian news. We focus on, well, what's happening in Victoria or New South Wales. You know, we can tend to forget that the correct comparison is every nation around the world is juggling this. Some have juggled it really well. We are in that very small group.